Johnny Depp is a Hollywood A-lister who started out his career as a beautiful man in 21 Jump Street with a pompadour. It's said that Johnny Depp was actually so beautiful that he proposed to himself, but was turned down because he wasn't beautiful enough for himself. After this tragic disappointment, it's said that he finished the series 21 Jump Street with his pompadour and drowned his sorrows in acting. But it stayed with him, as did his pompadour. One day, he looked at himself in the mirror, as was his habit, and questioned the pompadour. But it wasn't the usual line of questioning, the style of, should I let this lock of hair fall down to my nose or cut it a bit higher? The question was, what is this thing I'm wearing on my head, and do I think I'm Elvis Presley? It was a new idea that had never occurred to Johnny before, but where was it coming from? Now, the French language is a language that's much brainier than the English language, and the word pompadour actually comes from the Marquise de Pompadour from the 1800s. Aha! The plot thickens. Unbeknownst to Johnny Depp, the French language was acting on his subconscious and telling him things such as, if you can't make yourself happy, you might be able to make a woman happy. The exact details of what happened next are not clear, but we do know that Johnny scored a job in France playing in the film The Ninth Grade. While in a taxi one day, he heard a song on the radio, Joe the Taxi. He had a revelation. It was a moment of epiphany. He thought, what are the odds? Here I am, in France, in a taxi, listening to a song about a taxi, heartbroken, sung by a beautiful, unknown French woman. He knew he had to meet her. Now, at the time of the film, Johnny started to feel a bit of hostility coming from the French people. Having the name Johnny was the furthest thing away from French you could ever find. The last man in France to be called Johnny was a mechanic from the small village of Mazan who died in 1991 after a lengthy legal battle with his deceased parents who'd given him that dreadful name. The other 4 Johnnies had been expelled from France by the French government in the 80s already because they had disgraced the language and people were simply tired of saying Johnny all the time. So now the French people had another Johnny on their hands, and it was more than they could handle. Johnny Depp questioned his people, and it came to his ears through his second footman who had notions of French that the French people were indeed tired of saying Mr. Johnny all the time and would rather he go back home to chew gum or ride buffaloes or whatever it is that Americans do. He now had 2 problems on his hands. Not only was he heartbroken, but the country that seemed to hold the semblance of a solution was giving him the cold shoulder, and his pompadour was also getting wet. It turns out that the song that Johnny had heard in the taxi was Joe the Taxi, a hit song from 1987 sung by one Vanessa Paradis. Johnny sent his lackeys to the 4 corners of France to find the unknown diva. Through the powers of the pompadour and other unknown reasons, Vanessa Paradis, the singer of the song, fell in love with Johnny also. It was a match made in heaven. It made Johnny look a little less American, and it allowed Vanessa Paradis not to have to sing Joe the Taxi for a living anymore. But the union was short-lived, and a mere 14 years later, they divorced. There was a chink in the armour, a grave oversight coming from Johnny Depp. The union had been based on a misunderstanding, that the song Joe the Taxi made no bloody sense. It had been written by 4 professional songwriters and made absolutely no sense lyric-wise. For most people, this would have been cause for concern, but not for poor Johnny. You see, Johnny had dropped out of school early and wasn't accustomed to doing homework. If he had done his homework, he would have learned French and would have known that Joe the Taxi had been written by 4 professional writers and still made no sense. Now I hear you say, okay, Chris, but all this is in the past. He's moved on with his life. He's just been through the best court case of his life against Amber Heard. Okay, maybe. But let me put to you that in 2024, Johnny was back to his old ways, playing a French king in France in the film Jeanne du Barry. And which king is he playing but Louis XV, which also happens to be the worst style of furniture you could ever wish to put in a house. It's tacky, it's dreadful, and it shouts out, I want to be posh, but don't quite know how. The moral of this story is that Johnny didn't do his homework, neither in school, nor as it pertains to the French language. But we can't feel sorry for him. After all, WeCommunicate.com is entirely based on homework, and guarantees a precise and quantifiable learning of French. It's not like there weren't any solutions around.